episode, I am breaking down simplified acquisitions and the elements that go within it. Go ahead, push play, and I'll catch you on the inside. Welcome back, Bold Move Besties, to another episode of She Built Success. This one is going to be fun. Get your notepads ready. Go ahead, push play, and I'll catch you on the inside. Okay, so this particular one, I was on the fence if I really wanted to talk about it, but I think it's time to talk about it. So in past episodes, I've talked about purchase cards or micro purchases and simplified acquisitions. I want to break down some of the key pieces that goes into a simplified acquisition or a micro purchase. So a simplified acquisition typically falls under $250,000, and a micro purchase is usually under $10,000. That's dollars, US dollars. And if it's under DOD, you can sometimes get away with the $25K and under for a micro purchase. So I want to break down the key elements that go into putting together a simplified acquisition or putting together a micro purchase, which is known as, in the government space, a solicitation. So there are 6 key elements that go into this solicitation process, and I'm going to kind of bullet them out and I'll expand briefly on each of them. So there is requirements identification, and this is where an analysis is done by the government or by the program office. It really just depends, project, to say, what are our needs? What are we looking for? What do we want to buy, or what do we need to outsource? So they're doing a requirements analysis. Then there is the market research component. Now, this is all within the big umbrella of, determining their need and what that requirement is. And so they go in and they go into SAM.gov. So remember, by now you should be registered with SAM.gov, but if you're new here, catch a couple of episodes. I'll link them below. But SAM.gov is one way, and then the small business dynamic search is another way that market research is done to see what vendors are potentially available to fulfill this requirement. Now, this is part of the reason why I emphasize making sure your blurb about your company or what you do is keyword rich, but still makes sense. Because when they're doing the research, they're sometimes doing keyword research or NAICS code research to be able to find potential vendors that could meet this requirement when they're starting the beginnings of putting together a solicitation. All right, so the next key element is the acquisition strategy development. And in this component, they are actually looking at the size and the complexity of the offer, or the solicitation. And so under simplified acquisition, which obviously is a larger threshold, is $250K or less, whereas micro purchases is $10K or less. They're looking at, can this potentially be put out to market, or could we potentially find someone, a vendor, right, to be able to fulfill this? And so they're doing things to determine how they are going to put together this solicitation to the market. Are they going to just look for 3 different vendors that could potentially fulfill it, and out of those 3, pick the one, or are they going to go a different route? Okay. The next item in here is requirements documentation. So on SAM.gov, whenever you look up a solicitation, they typically have a statement of work with them. And in that statement of work, it outlines these are the requirements of said contract or project. And that is important because it helps you to identify, can I even meet this? Like, we've looked at solicitations in the past that have statements of work where when they're initially doing kind of the research and it's kind of in RFI mode where they're doing some discovery and some digging, it changes by the time it goes to RFP, which is request for proposal. And so understanding the statement of work for whatever phase that solicitation is in is imperative. So that's that next step in the acquisition and in the overarching key elements of simplified acquisitions and micro purchases. Small business owner, consultant, or service provider ready to break into government contracting, but not quite sure where to start or who you can trust? Let's change that. The Ready Swipe Gov Accelerator is our 12-week group coaching program that has a one-on-one guided experience feel. Inside, you'll learn how to position your business, package your services, and create your credit card swipeable offer that makes it easier for government buyers to say yes. Plus, you'll have the strategies and tools to be able to navigate the process with confidence. Now, spots are limited, so go ahead and apply at readyswipegov.com, and we can get started to that little step forward in government contracting. The next one that I wanted to cover is the internal coordination. So what ends up happening is when a project gets together and they're like, you know what, we have this gap in our business processes, or we have a need for something, they go and they talk to sometimes the small business office, which is why I keep saying it's important to develop the relationship with program offices, of course, and with projects, but with the small business office as well, because they almost act as a liaison between you as a small business and all the other projects that may reach out and say, hey, do you know of any vendors that specialize in AI? Or, hey, do you know of any vendors that might have done research in water, I don't know, water health or water, something with water, if you're in that space. And so they actually, tap on the small business office and say, hey, do you know anybody? And they sometimes could recommend you. You never know. So that's the importance of building those relationships. The last piece is, or second to last piece, is the funding and approval process. So this is where it goes through on the back end of the government side. It goes through the process to say, okay, how are we going to fund this? Do we have the funds for it? And more often than not, when they're doing that requirements, and if they're at the RFI stage and they're getting kind of or RFQ, because they sometimes put out RFQs, quotes, and they get a dollar amount, they're able to start putting together for them budget for it, right? The funding for it. And so they'll start working on the internal side of what that looks like. Now, the nitty gritty of what all that looks like, I'm not privy to. I'm actually in the process of understanding all that myself, but the internal process is what they're doing to determine if funding is available, and if funding is available, how much are we budgeting for this particular initiative, okay? And then finally, it's the actual preparation of the package and pre-solicitation. So in SAM.gov, there are different types of solicitations that are available. There are things called sources sought notices. There are pre-sold, which is pre-solicitation, which is what we're kind of talking about here, where that information is getting gathered so that they can at least put the initial ask out, or to see if the business community could fulfill this requirement that's in their head, right? So that's hopefully a good breakdown or understanding quickly of what it means to break down a simplified acquisition and the components that go into it from a government perspective. Now, as far as the people involved in this, and I've kind of alluded to this a little bit, the project office, the program office, if that is, at that next level. So the project is hierarchically, the program office is the larger of the two at the top, and then the project, like a specific project. So a program office could have many projects going. That's actually a real thing. And so the people that go into it, so these are the technical experts, the program managers, the end users, the contracting officers, and procurement specialists. Sometimes you hear contracting specialists, they're one and the same. The financial analysts, because remember we were talking about budget, and then the legal team, and then the small business or OSDBU office. And so those are the players that are in putting together this solicitation, or could be called upon, especially the small business office. So I want you to think about, when you're building your relationships, are you touching on all of those key players? Because at some point in time, they may come, to good use for your company or for your business. I know we've had interactions on the small business side as well as on the analyst side. And I guess we've touched all at this point. We've touched all areas. But what ends up happening is, oh, I know a person, or oh, I know a vendor, or even if we don't fit the bill, we've recommended other small businesses for a contract opportunity. Now, whether or not they got it, of course, that's up to that business. But it's just the importance of developing and cultivating those relationships actually matters. All right, so let's recap what we just covered. We talked about the need and the market research that is done in the very, very beginnings of a solicitation process. We talked about the acquisition strategy and how the government workforce kind of chooses and helps to weed out what that looks like in size and in complexity. We talked about how they develop their requirements and what they actually need to be fulfilled. And then we talked about the internal process very, very lightly of what that looks like and how it sources through. Then we also talked about the key players as well as what the funding would look like. So, Bold Besties, I have homework for you. I want you to go on SAM.gov, and if you haven't, go ahead and register, and think about or look at some of these contracts and determine, is it in a space as a pre-solicitation that you may be able to reach out to either the contracting officer or someone from the program office or even the small business office. So until next time, Bold Besties, I'll catch you on the next episode of She Built Success. Bye.